Welcome to Sahara TV's Country Focus segment. I'm Karen Attia. Ethiopia has been in international headlines recently, but not necessarily in a positive light. In the past few weeks, the Ethiopian government has sparked international outcry over its crackdowns on media and freedom of expression. Ethiopia has consistently ranked very low on international indexes for freedom of expression. Ethiopia has the second highest number of journalists in jail in Africa and the largest number of journalists in exile. Several weeks ago, prominent journalist Eskinder Nega was sentenced to 18 years in jail being accused of fomenting terrorism. This week, reports surfaced that longtime ruler Meles Zenawi is critically ill in the hospital. What would an Ethiopia without Zenawi look like, and how would that change dynamics in the Horn of Africa? Here to talk to me today is Mohammed Ademo, Ethiopian journalist and blogger. He's been quite vocal about the situation in Ethiopia, and we are grateful to have him on the show. He can be found on Twitter as @OPride. Thank you for joining us on Sahara TV, Mohammed.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so as far as, again, the situation for journalists in Ethiopia, it's consistently ranked as one of the worst places to be a reporter in the world today. Can you sort of, again, describe the situation that journalists face, and what is it like to try to report in Ethiopia?
It is very difficult. You're looking at Africa's most populous nation that has no press freedom or no free press to speak of. And it is in that situation, people are trying to write about the things that are going on in the country. When they do that, they get arrested and also get charged with high charges of treason and terrorism and other things for attempting to overthrow the government. So it is a very difficult and challenging environment to be a journalist. And as you have clearly mentioned, it has the highest number of journalists in jail and also in exile. And they're also charging not journalists in Ethiopia with this terrorism charge, but those who live in the West and write critically about the government. So,
has it always been this bad?
You see, prior to the 2005 election, the fledgling press was gaining some momentum. They were getting more critical, and there was a window of opportunity to actually, for the first time, have sort of a free press in Ethiopia. But when the ruling party, the EPRDF, lost election that year, they understood that the role of media was important in changing or in informing the public opinion against the government, and that's why they lost. So that's when they arrested the opposition leaders and all the journalists, including Eskinder Nega, who spent 17 months in jail with his wife, who was also a journalist and gave birth in prison at that point. So that's in 2005. For 17 months, they arrested them. So things got off to a wrong start after the election because the government felt that they're not controlling the message and they are giving too much leeway to the media so that they can turn people against them. And so in order to contain that, arresting few journalists was not enough because there were those who were outside who continued to write about these things. So what they did was they came up with a law where they can give it a judicious semblance of sort and say, look, this is our constitution and we're trying to protect the country from terrorism and we're trying to maintain peace and stability, which is what most people in the West, donors like. So
definitely.
It got complicated after that.
So then with these terrible crackdowns on freedom of expression and communication, I mean, how does an average Ethiopian get any sort of news or any sort of information about what's going on in Ethiopia and the outside world?
Well, it is difficult to say because there is no free press in the country. So interestingly, though, yesterday there was the Justice Ministry issued an order banning one of the last standing paper in the country called Fiti, which ironically also means justice. The paper is called Justice. And they issued banning its publication. And today they followed that order up with another, saying that you can't even distribute the ones that you already published. So now we're looking at a situation where the government media, which has no shred of independence, is the only alternative to the government propaganda. So there is no room there. So how do people get news? Look, my website and many other diaspora-based opposition and also independent websites are blocked in the country. And even if the websites were open, only less than 1% of Ethiopian people have access to the internet, and people don't have the luxury of accessing the web from phones the way we do now. It's changing now, but it's still far behind. So people used to turn to the free press, the independent press in the country. That's not there now. So it seems like there is no information. But luckily, though, the Voice of America.
Voice of America, VOA.
VOA broadcasts in 3 Ethiopian languages: the Oromo language, Amharic, and Tigrinya. Also Deutsche Welle in Germany also broadcasts in Amharic. So at this point, those are like the only 2. But then again, how many people listen to those, we still don't know.
Now, those aren't subject to any sort of censorship either. I mean, even if they're coming from foreign press services.
The VOA has been in a lot of altercation with the government, where the government, leading up to the 2010 election, they jammed the VOA. So the State Department and the VOA said, we're concerned and all this, and it is not right to jam our broadcast, and we are independent. And the government said VOA is creating, havoc in the country, and you are, inflaming things that are not there. So what happened was, a delegation from the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. went to Ethiopia. They had a conversation, and they allowed the VOA broadcast to go through. But VOA has been thinking about how to get around that. They've been broadcasting on the local television station called Arabsat.
Okay.
And also other mediums like making it accessible on the phone and with low bandwidth. But they also have their own challenges. The reporters for the Deutsche Welle always get harassed,
Sure.
and they for many years refused to allow reporters to report freely or granting them access to officials and whatnot.
So as far as the situation, the atmosphere of the restriction of journalists, it's not just jailing, and it's not just shutting down houses, but it's also jamming frequencies. It's also controlling the mobile phone. As I understand, Ethiopia only has one telecom provider, and it's through the government, correct? So I wanted to switch a little bit to yourself, because here we are in New York. We're in the diaspora. You're also blogging and writing about situation in Ethiopia. Did you ever report in Ethiopia, or you reported mostly from the States?
I sort of picked up journalism as opposition to government. So I was a student activist back home, and after I came to this country, we tried to raise awareness about these issues that doesn't get traction in the international media, and oftentimes we reach out, we send media advisory, we hold human rights rallies, and nobody really come and reports these events. So that's sort of how I got into journalism. So I've not formally, I wasn't a reporter when I was in Ethiopia. But now, there are a number of Ethiopian journalists. There are a lot of them out here, about 200 some journalists who are exiled.
Is there like sort of a community of exiled journalists? Is there any sort of coordination between you guys? I mean, what is the role that you guys play as far as trying to influence dialogue back home in Ethiopia?
You see, it's very hard to say, because everything that I write, the people of Ethiopia don't get to see it because it is blocked. Okay. So is everyone else, the rest of the journalists. So there is not one organization where we come together and work. But people are doing their level best. Obviously it is very hard to get information from Ethiopia. Phones are they're listening to phones, and you call someone, you can get someone in trouble. It's not as easy as going and meeting someone at a cafe and interviewing people. So it's hard. But there are people who are doing some great work, but it's not. I can't say how much it is influencing the public opinion back home. But what I understand our role to be is there are these fleeting news from international outlets, and we add context to that in sort of build on those and add perspective to those news and information that come out of it. And it helps the diaspora, which is very vocally opposed to the government, sort of it gives them information to campaign on, or to use it for their advocacy. And also others who we hope would listen and see these things, because Ethiopia again really relies on foreign aid. So
we'll come back to that point as well. So you mentioned earlier journalist Eskinder Nega, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison for, he was sentenced under the anti-terror law and accused of potentially starting a revolution against the government. And there was a huge international outcry, a lot of campaigns to try to get him freed from jail. Can you kind of enlighten us a little bit more? Why was the government so afraid of him? What was it that he wrote or that he was doing that made the government charge him with terrorism?
When they arrested Eskinder in 2005, they thought that was gonna scare him from continuing to write. Two, run away like the rest of us did.
To leave the country.
To leave the country.
So a lot of these threats, they're hoping that journalists will just leave the country and then they can go ahead and block.
Right. So, I mean, it's easy for them. It's less headache if Eskinder is out of the country. So that did not work. Eskinder stood his ground and he continued to write. And he wrote, interestingly though, the last column that he wrote was about the anti-terrorism law, in basically calling for press freedom in Ethiopia, and also looking at, last year was such an eventful year where, the Arab Spring and a lot of things were happening, and Eskinder was trying to analyze those regional events, what was going on in Nigeria, in Egypt, Libya, and other places, and in hoping that, is asking those questions, is it possible that the Arab Spring, would take a detour and come to Ethiopia? And essentially, that was seen as a threat, and he's not leaving the country, he's not shutting up. What do? You put him back in the jail. So that's sort of what they did.
And I mean, I've heard of countless efforts to try to free him, especially from the international community. I mean, is there any sort of recourse for him? Now that he's been sentenced, sort of what are the next steps for him? Are there attempts to try to appeal? I mean, is there even any way to appeal the decision?
It's a kangaroo court, right? I mean, this is not a justice system. Right. It's not functioning. It's not independent. So you can appeal all you want, and you know what the answer is. But there are a number of people who hope on this idea that Mullah's regime will write, a pardon letter as they did in the past, saying that, we indeed committed an act of terrorism, and we will stop writing these things and let us out. And it's possible that the government can use Eskinder, and especially because there is such a wide international outcry, use that as an opportunity to strike, to get some score, to score some points with their donors. They might pardon them, or a few of them down the road. But at this point, there is no, I'm not very hopeful. I mean, the State Department, issued one of those statements, recycled memos saying that we are concerned. And Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, who's on Senate Judiciary Committee, have issued about 2 press releases, to his credit, very critical releases at that. But those are just words. I mean, it doesn't do anything. And unless the West uses it as leverage to say, do something here and at least free the journalists, open up the media environment. But then again, the other argument is even if the West was willing to walk the talk, which they never do, even if they did, Mullah knows full well that the West needs him more than he needs them, because the Horn of Africa is going through interesting things. Look at what's going on in Ethiopia. For the first time in the history of that nation, the Ethiopian Muslims are rising up in millions, demanding religious freedom. And look, Somalia has always been used as a scare tactic by the Ethiopian government to say that if we don't keep an eye on these guys, the Al-Qaeda is coming there. There are established links of Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab, the Somali militant group. For all these reasons, the U.S. has already set up a drone attack point where they launch these things in Ethiopia itself. In Ethiopia sits a very interesting, very important strategic point. So for all that, even if they say, no, you need to stop cracking down on dissent, Mullah knows that China is there to help, and he will say, if you want to go that way, I don't need your help, and he can turn to China. So it's going to be an interesting
experience as far as following what the West is saying, and to see how Ethiopia reacts. Now, lastly, to sort of wrap up, since we only have a few minutes, you mentioned Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, and this week there have been reports circulating that he is critically ill in a Brussels hospital, and so now people are reflecting on what would a post-Zenawi Ethiopia or Horn of Africa look like. Now, obviously, the government is coming back with their rhetoric saying that he's on sick leave and he's just exhausted from his many, many years of service and will be back in the office very shortly. But I wanted you to just comment briefly on if Meles Zenawi, at the very least, is not able to return to his office, say, in a few months, or at the very worst, happens to pass away, what would a post-Zenawi Ethiopia look like in the immediate future?
I don't see any change. I mean, if you follow the press conference yesterday and also what some of the senior leaders in the ruling party are saying, the next prime minister, for all we know, is going to be from the same party. This is, the spin is that if Mullahs cannot continue doing his job, the parliament will elect a new prime minister.
So it's still the same party. I mean,
the parliament is made up of all but one person is an opposition, so the rest is one party. So we already know one vote cannot make all the difference to elect a prime minister who is not outside of that party, and it is only one person that can be elected, and it is not possible. So if the ruling party continues, I don't really see any change for that matter. I mean, it's just recycling the tactics that they've been using for many years. But some say that Mullas was actually an intellectual and sort of like an informed leader, and he's considerate. And some are thinking there is a power struggle within the party, and that might actually turn uglier because in fighting for the power, they might crack down mostly on the Muslim protesters that I mentioned, and also on dissent.
Okay, great. Well, we'll stand to see what happens. I mean, in the immediate future with Zenawi's health, and for especially following the plight of the journalists in Ethiopia. Now, is there a website or a place where people can find you and follow your readings to learn more about what's going on in Ethiopia?
Yes, they can follow me on allpride.com or follow me on Twitter at allpride. I'm also on Facebook. If you could just Google my name, Mohammed Ademo, it should be one of the first links that come up. So there are a number of ways to connect, and I hope you guys continue to watch the developments. And it looks like these are interesting times for Ethiopia, and very extraordinary in a lot of ways, because things can really take the wrong turn.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you again so much, Mohammed, for joining us today. It was great talking with you. So stay tuned for more from Sahara TV. I'm Karen Attia.